Need now is for a ceasefire to end the bloodshed.
I call for the permanent opening of the border crossings. It is the property of the Arab states, allowing medical supplies, food supplies, allowing medical crews to enter and help the 150,000 refugees in Gaza, who are now taking shelter in schools there.
The Federal Aviation Administration has lifted its short ban on flights in Israel's Ben Gurion Airport, thus diffusing what had become a minor flashpoint between the Israelis and their American allies. The so-called Hamas victory lap is thus canceled, but the international outrage remains as the Palestinian death count climbs toward the 700 mark. Was the Hamas plan all along to bring international pressure to bear and hope that would force Israel into capitulation? Welcome back to MidPoint. Former Iraq war veteran and Republican candidate for the California House of Representatives, Elan Carr, joins us. Mr. Carr, thank you so much for being here again today.
Good to be here. Good morning.
Good morning. I want to play a couple of sound bites for you, first of all, and I want to start the conversation here. First, we are going to hear from Valerie Amos, the United Nations Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, talking about civilians in this conflict. Then we are going to hear from British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond, talking about Israel having the right to defend themselves. And then a question after that. Please, here we go.
The majority of those killed in Gaza are women, children, men who have nothing to do with the fighting. That is the major concern that we have, that children, so many children have been killed as a result of the violence in the last few days.
My judgment at the moment is that it is safe to continue operating into Ben Gurion Airport, and British Airways is continuing to do so. But we will obviously want to receive assurances from the Israeli government that they will take every step possible to protect civil aviation traffic.
Mr. Carr, let me start out here by noting the fact that the United Nations is now looking at what they consider to be war crimes by both Hamas and by Israel. They are specifically, though, and a number of nations in the United Nations are talking about Israel first as being guilty of war crimes. As someone who follows this closely and as a Jew, how insulting is it to so many people who follow Israel, who are supporters of Israel, who know what has gone on here in the past, to hear Israel being accused of war crimes?
And you know, it's this typical UN even-handedness, an inability to distinguish between terrorism and democracy that we're seeing here. Well, war crimes on both sides. This is utter nonsense. In fact, you will notice that Israel is suffering a very high number of IDF casualties, over 30 killed in action in a week, which for the IDF, I mean, these are very high casualties. The reason why Israel is enduring those kinds of casualties is because it's sending infantrymen house to house, door to door, in very close quarters, in a guerrilla war, which is what it is in Gaza, specifically to avoid collateral damage. Israel is suffering casualties because it's trying to discriminate and avoid having civilians lose their lives or civilian property be destroyed. And now Israel is being blamed for war crimes. This is nonsense. Israel is governed by international law. The IDF is a remarkably law-abiding army that does everything it can to avoid collateral damage, and it's doing that here. The fact that Hamas is firing rockets into Israeli cities, targeting civilians, never mind indiscriminate attacks, but actually targeting civilians, and then using its own civilians as human shields, this is a war crime by the hour that they're committing, and it's appalling, and they are responsible for the loss of Palestinian life on their side.
In your opinion, then, is this something of evidence of a distaste for Israel by the members of the international community here, when you look at the fact that as you said right here, it is not a war crime here, yet it is Israel who is being talked about first, not Hamas, not the potential for human shields, not the launching of missiles into Israel, but it is Israel that is first and foremost on a lot of these press releases and a lot of the lips of the world?
Well, this is nothing new. You know, the distaste for Israel in the United Nations and among various organs of the international community is well known and has been going on for decades.
But why is it still going on? Why has it not changed?
Well, I think you have to look at the composition of some of these organs and the UN Human Rights Council and various other kinds of UN bodies that are dominated by countries that are not sympathetic to Israel, and in fact, in many cases, not sympathetic to the West. And so this is no surprising no surprise in terms of the development. You should know that the number of condemnatory resolutions that target Israel exceed the condemnatory resolutions targeting any other country combined. And so it's just, you just shake your head, but this is par for the course, business as usual at the UN. What Israel needs to do is ignore this and focus on what it's doing, which is winning a war against a lethal, dangerous terrorist organization that threatens not only Israel, but ultimately, as part of its network, threatens America. Israel needs to win this and do it with full compliance with international law, as it has been doing.
Is it just as simple to say that in many places it is another example of rampant anti-Semitism around the world?
Well, I think there's some of that. I certainly think that there is anti-Semitism that you can find among some groups and some countries, but also I think there's just simply a culture among certain bodies in the UN of being unsympathetic to the West. And so I don't want to label them all anti-Semites, but I think, although that's an ingredient, but the fact of the matter is certain bodies of the United Nations have an historic distaste and opposition for the West. And Israel is a Western, pluralistic, tolerant democracy that respects women and gays and a free press. And that kind of society is frankly anathema to many parts of the world. And so that's one of the reasons why Israel is so often a target of opprobrium in the United Nations.
Hamas's political leader has said recently that they will never accept a ceasefire plan that did not offer the ending of the Israeli blockade of Gaza. The Israelis say that is absolutely and completely off the table. So is John Kerry wasting his time?
Well, I think what Israel needs to do is win this war. And what we've seen in the past is that every time Hamas launches barrages of rockets into Israeli schools and towns and playgrounds, Israel then has no choice but to defend itself and launches a ground campaign, beginning an air campaign, then a ground campaign. And then what happens is every single time there's pressure from the international community and an untimely ceasefire is forced on Israel before the job is completed. And then in that lull, Hamas rearms with Iranian help, builds new tunnels, and it all starts over again. This is folly, and what Israel really needs to do is win this thing decisively. It needs to substantially erode, if not destroy, Hamas's capabilities of launching rockets into Israeli civilian centers, and it needs to prevent the smuggling of weapons on one hand and the kidnapping of Israeli civilians and soldiers on the other through these tunnels, these terrorist tunnels. 300, my goodness. Israel thought there were 80 or 90, 300 terrorist tunnels that they've been digging. Instead of building schools and communities, they're building terrorist tunnels to kill Israelis. This is just appalling, and Israel needs to win this war. That's what needs to happen. And the United States should be telling Israel it needs to win this war instead of urging an untimely ceasefire.
Couple of minutes I have left then. How do you win this war decisively without then killing more civilians?
Well, the way to do that is exactly how Israel is doing it. You send armor and infantry into Gaza to do the work on the ground. It's a lot easier to accomplish this by air. But Israel isn't doing that. And again, it's critical to point out to our viewers that Israel is suffering enormous casualties because it is sending infantrymen into these alleyways and they're sitting ducks in these places.
Well, it is fair to say that the world looks at 30+ casualties and they don't see that as enormous.
Oh, it's enormous. It's enormous. For an idea, and you look at the casualties, the commander of the Golani Brigade was one of the injured. The commander. So I mean, you're talking about injured and wounded at all levels, and KIAs at all levels too of rank. I mean, this is a real war, and Israel is endangering its troops in order to minimize Palestinian civilian casualties. By contrast, Hamas is trying to maximize Palestinian civilian casualties, which is a disgrace.
I only have about 40 seconds left. When the FAA came in and said no flights to Ben Gurion Airport, was that just a knee-jerk reaction and simply just a mistake that they have now corrected?
Well, it was a mistake, and I understand why they did it. They want to cover themselves, but this was a big mistake. It handed Hamas a victory. It encouraged the effort to get rockets closer and closer to Ben Gurion Airport to have this happen again, because obviously if the FAA bans flights, it strangles the Israeli economy. This was a mistake, and I'm very grateful, and I commend the FAA for lifting the ban.
And another quick question, seeing as I have about 20 seconds left here. Do you expect Hezbollah to get involved, as some people have indicated they might?
Hezbollah and Hamas are both Iranian-backed and Iranian proxies. And so it is expected, Hezbollah being one of the best trained military forces in the Middle East, and it's a terrorist organization, it would be expected that Hezbollah would offer support for what is going on Israel's south. Although they are, of course, engaged in mass murder currently in Syria, which they're doing with great efficiency.
Elan Carr, it is always a pleasure to have you on the show. We look forward to doing it again. Thank you so much for your time.
Good to be with you.
All right, coming up next, it's amazing what a pair of eyeglasses and a national crisis on your own state borders can do to improve one's possibility for the White House. The case for a Rick Perry resurgence, and so much more in the political arena. I tried the glasses one time and they just really didn't work for me. They seem to be working for him, though. That and much more coming up right here on MidPoint, where every day we question everything.